Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that every piece of technology, computers, phones, vehicles, electricity, even the simplest machines, has vanished from existence. No engines roar, no lights switch on, no messages flash across screens. Humanity is thrust back into a world that resembles the Stone Age, where survival depends not on modern tools, but on instinct, strength, and the land itself. At first, the shock would be overwhelming. In a single night, billions of people would lose access to food, water, and shelter as supply chains collapse. Grocery stores would no longer receive shipments, refrigerators would stop running, and water systems would fail without pumps powered by electricity. Cities, which rely heavily on technology for everything from traffic lights to sewage disposal, would quickly descend into chaos. Within days, hunger and disease would begin spreading, showing how fragile our modern world truly is when stripped of its technological backbone. Communication would become one of the greatest challenges. Without phones, radios, or the internet, humans would return to face-to-face interactions and rudimentary forms of signaling. Large societies would fracture into smaller communities because distance would once again become a nearly insurmountable barrier. Letters would no longer exist without paper production and postal systems. Instead, information would be carried by word of mouth, messengers, or perhaps carved into wood and stone, just as it was thousands of years ago. Transportation would also collapse. Without cars, planes, or ships powered by engines, travel would be limited to walking, horseback riding, or building simple rafts. Globalization would vanish instantly. No more imported goods, no more international trade, no more long-distance travel. Nations would shrink back into isolated tribes and villages, forced to depend entirely on their immediate environment for survival. The idea of a global community would cease to exist, replaced by local survival groups who might never know what is happening beyond the horizon. Food production would take the hardest hit. Modern agriculture relies on tractors, irrigation systems, fertilizers, and genetically engineered crops, all gone in an instant. Farming would return to its most primitive form: hunting, gathering, and small-scale cultivation using handmade tools. For billions of people, especially those living in urban areas with no direct access to land, this shift would be catastrophic. Entire cities would become uninhabitable as people flee in search of fertile ground, rivers, and forests that can sustain life. Medicine, too, would vanish with technology. Hospitals would be useless without electricity, machines, or manufactured drugs. Simple injuries like broken bones or infections, which are easily treated today, could become deadly once more. Life expectancy would plummet, and childbirth would once again be one of the most dangerous experiences for women. Humanity would be reminded of just how brutal survival was before modern science extended our lives and reduced suffering. This sudden regression would not just test our physical endurance, it would strip away the very identity of modern humans. Without technology, people would face a sobering truth: we are not as self-sufficient as we like to believe. As days turn into weeks, the world without technology would begin to settle into a harsh new reality. The conveniences of modern civilization would be nothing more than memories, and people would be forced to rediscover the skills of their distant ancestors. Fire-making, tool crafting, and shelter building would become the foundation of survival once more. For many, this knowledge has long been forgotten, but necessity would drive people to learn quickly or perish. Communities would start forming around natural resources. Rivers would become the lifeblood of new settlements, providing water for drinking, bathing, and fishing. Forests would become both a source of food and danger, offering game for hunting, but also hiding predators. In this world, the geography of survival would be determined by proximity to fertile land, clean water, and safe shelter. Large cities abandoned by modern systems would crumble, while rural areas rich in natural resources could become thriving centers of human life. Power structures would also shift dramatically. Governments and modern institutions would collapse without the ability to communicate, enforce laws, or provide services. Authority would revert to the local level, where strength, leadership, and resourcefulness determine who survives. Tribal structures might emerge once again, with leaders chosen for their ability to protect, provide, and organize. Humanity's political landscape, once complex and global, would shrink back into small, survival-based groups. Culture and knowledge would suffer a massive blow. Without books, computers, or machines to preserve and share information, much of human history, science, and art would vanish. Generations of progress could be lost in the span of a few years, as oral tradition becomes the only way to pass knowledge forward. People might remember fragments of history or technology, but without the tools to replicate them, those memories would fade into legend. The digital world that once stored the sum of human knowledge would be irretrievably gone. Social dynamics would change just as drastically. In the absence of modern distractions like television, social media, or entertainment industries, daily life would revolve entirely around survival and community. Families would live closely together, not only for emotional support, but also for protection and labor. Gender roles, which had evolved significantly in the modern age, could regress under survival pressures, with divisions of labor resembling those of prehistoric societies. Survival would require cooperation, but it could also ignite conflict as groups compete for scarce resources. Violence and warfare could become common. With food and shelter limited, communities might raid one another, fighting over hunting grounds, fertile soil, or fresh water. The idea of nations and borders would be meaningless. Power would belong to those strong enough to defend what they have. Humanity could enter a new dark age, where survival is dictated by force rather than diplomacy, and where the concept of human rights is overshadowed by the primal law of might. Yet, even in such bleak conditions, humanity's resilience would shine. People would not simply fade away. They would adapt, endure, and find meaning in the struggle to survive in a world reset to its most primitive form. As centuries passed in this technology-free Earth, humanity would begin to rebuild, but on a completely different foundation than before. The first generations would struggle, but over time, people would regain mastery over fire, farming, and toolmaking. Stone, wood, and bone would once again become the building blocks of civilization. Communities would experiment with primitive agriculture, cultivating grains and domesticating animals, slowly creating a new agricultural revolution. In many ways, it would mirror the progress of our ancient ancestors, but with one critical difference: memory. Even without machines, people would carry the knowledge of what once existed. Stories of flying metal birds, glowing screens, and medicine that could heal any illness would linger like myths. These tales could inspire future generations, motivating them to recreate lost innovations. Though without technology to guide them, progress would be painstakingly slow. It might take thousands of years to return to the level of advancement humanity had before, but the seed of innovation would never be entirely lost. Nature, however, would thrive in this world stripped of human industry. Forests would regrow where cities once stood. Rivers and oceans would cleanse themselves of pollution, returning to pristine conditions not seen for millennia. Animals would reclaim their territories, wandering freely through ruins of skyscrapers and highways. Without machines scarring the earth, the balance of ecosystems would be restored. Humanity, once the dominant force shaping the planet, would become just another species struggling for survival in nature's grand design. Religion and spirituality might also take on a renewed role. Without science and technology to explain the mysteries of life, people would once again look to the stars, the weather, and the cycles of nature for meaning. Sun, moon, and fire could become central symbols of belief, just as they were for ancient civilizations. Myths and legends would grow around the ruins of our modern world, towering skeletons of steel and concrete becoming sacred places, worshipped as the work of forgotten gods. The human spirit, however, is not easily broken. Even without machines, humanity would find ways to express creativity and intelligence. Cave paintings could return, music made with primitive instruments might fill the air, and storytelling would become the heartbeat of culture. While modern luxuries would be gone, the essence of human connection, love, family, friendship, and art would remain. Stripped of distractions, life might even feel more raw and meaningful, though infinitely harsher and more uncertain. Ultimately, an Earth without technology would be a brutal teacher. It would remind us of how far we've come, and how fragile our modern comforts truly are. Every bite of food, every warm shelter, and every step towards safety would demand effort and sacrifice. But at the same time, it would prove that humanity's greatest strength has never been its machines. It is adaptability. Even if technology vanished overnight, the will to survive, to rebuild, and to dream would endure. Humanity might be thrust back into the Stone Age, but given enough time, our resilience would once again push us forward, inch by inch, toward a brighter dawn.